Dawn broke like molten gold. That's how the skies above Brunei shimmered on one of the most defining days in the nation's history, the day Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah ascended the throne. The year was 1967, and the small yet wealthy sultanate on the island of Borneo was about to witness a new era. The young prince, just 21 years old, was stepping into a destiny carved by centuries of tradition, expectation, and responsibility. Brunei was no ordinary kingdom. Though tiny in size, it carried a legacy that stretched back to the 14th century, when the Bolkiah dynasty first rose to power. For hundreds of years, the family name carried immense prestige, shaping the region's history and culture. But in the modern 20th century, times were changing rapidly. Colonial powers had spread their influence across Southeast Asia, oil had been discovered under Brunei's soil, and the balance between tradition and modernization was delicate. Into this critical moment walked a young man named Hassan al-Bolkiah, chosen not by chance but by blood and fate. His father, Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddin III, was a remarkable leader in his own right. Often called the architect of modern Brunei, he had set the foundation for the country's transition from a protectorate under the British Crown towards a more independent identity. Yet in 1967, he made an extraordinary decision: he abdicated the throne in favor of his son. For Brunei, it was both shocking and inspiring. Abdications were rare in monarchies, most rulers reigned until death. But Sultan Omar Ali, forward-thinking and keen to ensure stability, believed the time had come for new blood and youthful energy to guide Brunei's next chapter. Thus, on October 5, 1967, in a ceremony steeped in both grandeur and sacred tradition, Hassan al-Bolkiah was proclaimed Sultan. The air was electric with hope. Citizens filled the streets, colorful flags fluttered, and the solemn beat of ceremonial drums echoed across Bandar Seri Begawan, the capital. Religious scholars recited prayers, while royal guards adorned in glittering regalia stood tall to mark the sacred transfer of power. But this was only the beginning. The coronation in 1968 elevated the moment to an unforgettable spectacle. Imagine the scene: golden carriages gliding through the streets, traditional warriors marching in perfect rhythm, and emissaries from across the world arriving in Brunei to pay respect to the new sultan. The event was more than pageantry. It was a public declaration that Brunei's monarchy was not fading into history but was alive, proud, and ready for the modern age. For the people of Brunei, watching a 21-year-old sultan take the oath of leadership stirred mixed emotions. On one hand, he was young, untested, and stepping into massive shoes. On the other, his youth symbolized energy, progress, and a bridge between the older generation shaped by colonial realities and the younger generation dreaming of independence and prosperity. To them, Sultan Hassan Al was not just a ruler, he was a living embodiment of hope. At the heart of his coronation lay centuries-old rituals. The ceremonies blended Islamic traditions, which defined the spiritual core of Brunei, with Malay royal customs, showcasing the Sultanate's deep cultural heritage. Every step, every word, every gesture had symbolic meaning, from the sprinkling of holy water to the placing of the royal crown, representing both divine blessing and earthly authority. To the people, it was not only a royal event but also a spiritual renewal, as if the kingdom itself had been reborn under new light. Behind the scenes, however, the challenges were immense. Brunei was rich in oil and gas resources, but its political future was uncertain. Britain still held responsibility for its defense and foreign affairs. The question of independence loomed large, and many wondered how a 21-year-old sultan could shoulder such responsibilities. Yet, even in those early days, Hassan al-Bolkiah displayed a calm determination. Educated in prestigious institutions, including Sandhurst Royal Military Academy in the UK, he was no stranger to discipline and leadership. His international exposure combined with his deep grounding in Bruneian values made him uniquely suited for the throne. The young sultan's early speeches emphasized continuity, respect for tradition, and commitment to his people. He spoke of his duty as not just a ruler but a servant of his nation, bound by faith and guided by the legacy of his ancestors. In his words, leadership was not about glory, but about service, humility, and protection of his people. As the celebrations of his coronation spread across the kingdom, ordinary citizens felt a surge of unity. Villages held communal feasts, mosques echoed with prayers of gratitude, and children played in the streets waving small flags of Brunei. The moment stitched the nation together. A reminder that even in uncertain times, Brunei had a leader ready to guide them. Looking back, historians often say that Sultan Hassan Al's accession was the turning point of modern Brunei. It marked the closing of one era, the colonial protectorate, and the slow but steady rise of a sovereign, wealthy, and culturally proud nation. For Hassan al-Bolkiah personally, it was the day he transformed from a young prince into one of the world's longest reigning monarchs, his reign stretching across decades, shaping every facet of Bruneian society. In the glow of that golden dawn, a kingdom was awakened. And though few could have predicted the twists and turns that lay ahead, prosperity, challenges, controversies, and global headlines, one thing was certain: on that fateful day in 1967, Brunei found in Hassan al-Bolkiah not just a sultan, but a symbol of resilience and renewal. The year was 1984, and the winds of change were sweeping across Southeast Asia. For more than a century, Brunei had lived under the protective shadow of the British crown. It was a small but immensely wealthy sultanate, rich in oil and natural gas, yet still tied to colonial oversight in defense and foreign affairs. Many wondered, would Brunei ever step fully into the world as a sovereign nation, or remain forever in the shadow of its protector? The answer came on a day etched forever into Bruneian history, January 1, 1984. As the world celebrated the arrival of a new year, the people of Brunei celebrated something far greater: their independence. And at the center of this transformation stood Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah, the young monarch who had already spent nearly 2 decades preparing for this very moment. The scene was unforgettable. The royal capital, Bandar Seri Begawan, was alive with music, color, and celebration. Streets were lined with waving flags, mosques resonated with prayers, and families gathered in joy. In a solemn but hopeful ceremony, Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah declared to his people and the world, Brunei was now free, independent, and sovereign. It was not merely a political transition, it was the rebirth of an identity. For centuries, Brunei had been a proud kingdom, once stretching its influence across Borneo and into the seas of Southeast Asia. Colonial pressures had shrunk its borders and clipped its wings. But now, in 1984, the nation reclaimed its dignity under the steady hand of its sultan. What made this independence remarkable was the sultan's unique role. In most modern nations, power is divided among presidents, prime ministers, parliaments, and ministers. But Brunei chose a different path. Sultan Hassan al did not simply serve as a ceremonial head of state, he became the very heart of governance itself. He assumed not only the throne but also the posts of Prime Minister, Finance Minister, Defense Minister, and Foreign Affairs Minister. In essence, the destiny of Brunei flowed directly through him. To some, it seemed an impossible burden. To others, it was a mark of absolute authority, a reminder that Brunei was a monarchy in the truest sense of the word. Yet this concentration of power came with a promise, that the Sultan would use his authority for the prosperity of his people. And in those early years of independence, he delivered. Brunei's immense reserves of oil and natural gas became the fuel for its transformation. While many newly independent nations struggled with poverty, Brunei soared on a tide of wealth. The Sultan ensured that this wealth was not just kept in royal coffers but was invested in the well-being of his subjects. Education became free. Healthcare became free. Taxes were abolished. Imagine the astonishment of citizens, living in a world where the government asked nothing of them in taxes, but gave so much in return. For the average Bruneian family, this was a golden era. Parents could send their children to school without worrying about fees. Hospitals and clinics opened their doors to provide care at no cost. Public housing projects ensured that families had secure homes. Even fuel and basic utilities were heavily subsidized. It felt, to many, like living in a kingdom of abundance. Internationally, the world began to take notice. Brunei was small, but its wealth per capita soared to some of the highest in the world. Its glittering independence ceremonies and lavish royal traditions caught headlines, while economists marveled at how this tiny nation, with fewer than 500,000 people at the time, could wield such immense prosperity. But Sultan Hassanal was not content with wealth alone. He wanted Brunei to stand tall on the global stage. As both ruler and foreign minister, he began to weave his nation into the fabric of international diplomacy. Brunei joined the United Nations and became an active member of ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. The Sultan himself represented his country at global forums, a young monarch speaking for a nation that was small in size but ambitious in spirit. Still, independence was not without challenges. Some critics questioned whether the concentration of power in one man's hands could truly last. Others wondered if Brunei's dependence on oil and gas would one day leave it vulnerable. Yet, in those early decades, the Sultan's popularity remained strong. His people saw not just a ruler, but a guardian who provided stability and prosperity. There was also something deeply symbolic about the way he carried himself. At public events, the Sultan often mingled with ordinary citizens, shaking hands, exchanging words, and reminding them that he saw himself not only as monarch but as protector and servant of the people. This personal connection strengthened the bond between ruler and ruled. By the late 1980s, Brunei's identity as a wealthy, stable, and devoutly Islamic nation was firmly established. The Sultan's vision was clear: preserve tradition, embrace prosperity, and maintain independence without bending to outside pressures. While other nations in the region wrestled with political upheavals, coups, and economic struggles, Brunei stood as a quiet, shining jewel on the island of Borneo, rich, secure, and led by one man who embodied both ancient royal lineage and modern authority. And so, the story of Brunei's independence is not just about breaking free from colonial ties. It is about how one sultan, young but determined, guided his nation into the modern world without losing its soul. With oil wealth as his tool and monarchy as his compass, Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah forged a nation that would, for decades to come, be both admired and debated around the world. Close your eyes and imagine this: a palace so enormous it dwarfs almost every royal residence in the world. A palace with golden domes that shine under the tropical sun, halls adorned with marble and chandeliers, and a residence so vast it could house an entire city within its walls. This is not a fantasy. This is Istana Nurul Aman, the official residence of Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah, and the crown jewel of Brunei's royal grandeur. The name itself, Istana Nurul Aman, translates to Palace of the Light of Faith. Built in the 1980s at the height of Brunei's oil wealth, it stands as the world's largest residential palace, sprawling across the banks of the Brunei River. With over 1,700 rooms, 257 bathrooms, a banquet hall that can seat thousands, and even its own mosque capable of holding 1,500 worshippers, the palace is more than just a home, it is a symbol of absolute monarchy and limitless luxury. When foreign dignitaries arrive in Brunei, they are often stunned by the scale of the palace. Golden staircases sweep through endless corridors, and every hall reflects both Islamic architecture and modern extravagance. The Sultan hosts glittering receptions here, especially during Hari Raya Eid al-Fitr, when the palace opens its doors to ordinary Bruneians who come to greet their ruler in person. For many citizens, stepping into the palace is like entering a dream, proof that their tiny nation is home to one of the world's most opulent monarchies. But the grandeur of Istana Nurul Aman is only the beginning. Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah became famous not just for his palace, but for his legendary taste for luxury. He amassed one of the world's largest and most extravagant collections of cars, by some estimates, numbering into the thousands. Imagine a garage filled with rare Rolls-Royces, Ferraris, Lamborghinis, and custom-made Bentleys, each polished to perfection. Some of these cars are so unique that they were designed exclusively for the Sultan himself. To enthusiasts around the globe, his collection is the stuff of myth, valued in the billions. His love of wealth extended beyond cars. Private jets, each customized with golden interiors, sprawling estates across the globe, and priceless art collections formed part of the Sultan's treasure chest. Where other monarchs might show restraint, Sultan Hassanal's lifestyle became a symbol of Brunei's oil-fueled prosperity. It was as though the kingdom's vast resources had materialized into tangible displays of grandeur. Yet, behind this glittering display lay a striking paradox. While the Sultan surrounded himself with unimaginable luxury, ordinary Bruneians lived modest but comfortable lives. Thanks to the oil wealth, they enjoyed free healthcare, education, housing support, and no taxes. Poverty was rare, and most families had stability. Still, the contrast between the Sultan's extravagance and the simple lives of his citizens drew attention worldwide. To critics, it was excess beyond imagination; to supporters, it was the rightful display of a monarch blessed with divine authority and immense national wealth. The palace itself became a metaphor for Brunei under Hassan al-Bolkiah, majestic, wealthy, and deeply rooted in tradition, but also secluded and enigmatic. Unlike Buckingham Palace in London or the White House in Washington, Istana Nurul Aman is not a political hub open to public debate or democracy. Instead, it is a fortress of royal authority, where every decision flows from the throne outward. Foreign journalists often marveled at this duality. On one hand, Brunei was a peaceful, welfare-rich society where citizens lacked for little. On the other hand, its ruler lived in a world of unparalleled opulence, his wealth measured in billions, his palace larger than the Vatican, his car collection rivaling entire countries' GDPs. In many ways, Brunei's story became inseparable from the image of its sultan. The man who held all the power and all the riches. But for the people of Brunei, extravagance was not viewed with resentment. Instead, many saw it as a reflection of national pride. The Sultan's wealth was not just his own, but a symbol that Brunei, though tiny in size, was powerful, independent, and rich in blessings. When citizens visited the palace during public celebrations, they didn't just see marble halls and golden chandeliers, they saw their nation's success embodied in stone and light. Still, questions lingered outside Brunei. Could such extravagance last forever? Oil and gas wealth had built the palace and funded the luxury, but global markets are fickle, and reserves are finite. Would Brunei one day face a reckoning when the wells ran dry? These questions hovered like shadows, even as the Sultan continued to bask in the glow of wealth. The story of Sultan Hassanal's palace and lifestyle is not just about luxury. It is about image, power, and identity. The Istana Nurul Aman is more than a home, it is a message to the world that Brunei, though small, stands among the great monarchies of history. The cars, the jets, the art, all serve to craft the legend of a sultan who lives beyond ordinary limits. For Bruneians, however, it is also a reminder of the delicate balance between prosperity and humility. Their ruler's extravagance exists alongside their own secure and comfortable lives, creating a unique social contract. He gives them stability and welfare, and in return, they give him loyalty and acceptance of his grandeur. Thus, the Palace of Dreams is not merely a monument to luxury, it is the beating heart of Brunei's royal story, a symbol of both the blessings of oil wealth and the paradoxes of absolute monarchy. And within its gilded walls lives the Sultan, a man whose life is as dazzling as the chandeliers that light his halls, and whose reign has made Brunei one of the most fascinating kingdoms on earth. When power shines brightest, shadows always follow. Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah, the monarch who brought Brunei wealth and stability, also became the subject of intense global scrutiny. His story in this chapter is not just one of prosperity, but of faith, laws, backlash, and resilience. The guardian of tradition. For decades, Sultan Hassanal was celebrated as the steady hand guiding Brunei through modernization without letting go of its deep Islamic roots. He was not just a king in ceremonial robes, he was a man of conviction. His belief in Islam as the guiding light of society was unwavering, and he often described his role as both a monarch and a guardian of faith. But being the protector of tradition in a rapidly globalizing world is no easy task. By the 2000s, Brunei stood out. While neighboring countries embraced liberal ideas and rapid modernization, the Sultan doubled down on preserving Islamic values at the heart of his nation's identity. The Sharia law announcement. Then came the turning point. In 2014, Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah announced a new legal framework, a national Sharia penal code. This wasn't just an adjustment, it was a dramatic shift. The laws introduced severe punishments, amputation for theft, death by stoning for adultery, and harsh penalties for homosexuality. By 2019, the world's attention zeroed in on Brunei. The headlines were relentless, describing the laws as barbaric and medieval. International celebrities, governments, and activists all spoke out. Calls for boycotts of Brunei-owned hotels echoed across Hollywood and Europe. Overnight, the Sultan, once admired for his wealth and long reign, became a controversial figure. Faith or fear? Why would a ruler who had given his people prosperity risk such backlash? Analysts suggested it wasn't just about law, but symbolism. To the Sultan, these laws represented a defense of Islamic morality, a declaration that Brunei would not bend under Western cultural influence. For his supporters, the penal code was a proud reaffirmation of Brunei's Islamic heritage. They argued that actual enforcement would be minimal, and indeed, many of the harshest punishments were rarely, if ever, carried out. The laws were seen more as a shield of faith than a sword of judgment. But to critics, even symbolic laws carried heavy consequences. Brunei became isolated on the global stage, with its reputation tarnished by human rights concerns. A king under fire. In those years, Sultan Hassan al faced some of the toughest questions of his reign. Could he be both the modern monarch who provided welfare, and the devout guardian enforcing strict religious codes? Could Brunei enjoy the luxuries of globalization while rejecting its cultural tides? The Sultan, often silent on global criticism, stood firm. He reminded his people that Brunei's first duty was to God, not to the approval of outsiders. His resolve was unshaken, even as boycotts and protests swept across Europe and America. The longest reigning monarch. Yet, despite the controversy, one fact remained undeniable: Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah was the world's longest reigning living monarch. By the late 2010s, his reign had lasted more than 5 decades. He had outlived the reigns of kings, queens, and presidents across the globe. In Brunei, his image was not that of a villain, but of a father figure. Many citizens respected his efforts to maintain cultural and religious values while still providing for their everyday needs. Schools, hospitals, and housing remained free. Taxes did not exist. The oil wealth of the nation still flowed into the hands of the people, even as the world criticized his policies. A nation in balance. The Sultan's story during this chapter is one of contrasts. On one side, his palace shimmered with gold, his car collection stunned the world, and his people enjoyed some of the best welfare benefits anywhere. On the other, he was condemned for laws that seemed torn from another century. It was a reminder of Brunei itself, a country both ancient and modern, wealthy and conservative, admired and criticized. And through it all, Sultan Hassan al remained at the center, balancing faith and governance like a tightrope walker. Beyond controversy. As time passed, the global outrage cooled, but the memory of those debates remained. To some, the Sultan's Sharia laws marked him forever as a ruler out of step with modern values. To others, they showed a leader willing to withstand the storm for what he believed was right. His reign, however, continued unbroken. In the mosques of Brunei, his name was still prayed for. In the palaces, his rule was still unquestioned. And in the streets, the people still lived under the protection of his monarchy, benefiting from the oil-driven prosperity he had guarded for decades. A monarch tested by fire. History often remembers rulers not for their calm years, but for the storms they endure. For Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah, the storm of faith and controversy defined him as much as his wealth or his palace. He was no longer just the young man who inherited a throne. He was a leader tested by global judgment, by the weight of tradition, and by the challenge of reconciling ancient faith with modern reality. And though the world may argue about his decisions, one truth remains: the Sultan endured. His reign stretched on, his throne unshaken, and his place in history secured, not just as a king of gold, but as a king of conviction. The sun rises slowly over the skyline of Bandar Seri Begawan, its golden light bouncing off mosque domes and river waters. And somewhere within that glow lies a truth about Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah: his reign is not just about palaces or power, but about how one man's vision shaped an entire nation's destiny. For decades, Sultan Hassan al has stood as both guardian of tradition and architect of progress. In a world where monarchies have crumbled, Brunei's king has not only survived but also thrived, an extraordinary achievement in the modern era. His story, even with controversies, has become inseparable from the story of Brunei itself. A mosque of dreams. Perhaps no symbol captures this balance better than the Jame Asr Hassan al-Bolkiah Mosque, the largest mosque in Brunei. Commissioned by the Sultan himself to mark his silver jubilee, the mosque is a masterpiece of faith and architecture. Imagine towering golden domes glittering under tropical sunlight, marble courtyards stretching endlessly, and fountains sparkling like diamonds. At night, its illuminated arches glow against the dark sky, reminding every Bruneian that their monarch did not just rule, he built, created, and gave back to his people. For citizens, the mosque is more than a place of prayer. It's a legacy of stability, an assurance that their king valued both their faith and their future. Diplomacy on the global stage. But the Sultan's vision stretched far beyond his kingdom's shores. While Brunei is small in size, Hassan al-Bolkiah ensured it was never small in influence. Through ASEAN, the Sultan championed unity in Southeast Asia, balancing the interests of giants like China and the United States with quiet diplomacy. He also engaged with Islamic organizations across the world, positioning Brunei as a respected voice in the global Muslim community. Unlike leaders who sought attention through fiery speeches, the Sultan often preferred calm dialogue, letting Brunei's prosperity speak louder than politics. This quiet strength earned him recognition, not as a ruler of a tiny state, but as a monarch whose word carried weight on the world stage. Trials of age and duty. Yet even the strongest figures are not untouched by time. Recently, during an ASEAN summit in Kuala Lumpur, the world held its breath when news broke: the Sultan had been hospitalized for fatigue. For many Bruneians, it was a sobering reminder. Their monarch, who once took the throne as a 21-year-old prince, is now a man in his late 70s. Though reported to be in stable condition, the incident sparked whispers: what will Brunei look like after him? But within weeks, he returned, rested, resolute, and ready to lead again. That resilience became another chapter in his legend, a king who, even in old age, continues to stand by his people. A reign woven with contradictions. Sultan Hassan al's legacy is not a simple one. It is a tapestry of wealth and welfare, tradition and modernity, reverence and controversy. On one hand, his citizens enjoy privileges most nations only dream of: free education, healthcare, housing support, and no income tax. On the other, his rule has been criticized for lack of political freedom and the introduction of strict Sharia laws. This duality defines him. Some see him as a symbol of Islamic pride and royal dignity, while others see a ruler reluctant to change in the face of global progress. Yet, whether adored or opposed, one truth remains: he cannot be ignored. The monarch who endures. As the world changes rapidly, kingdoms replaced by republics, traditions swallowed by globalization, Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah remains one of the last absolute monarchs on earth. His reign has lasted longer than most modern leaders could even imagine, making him the longest reigning living monarch today. And in Brunei, stability matters. The oil wealth, the welfare state, the glittering mosques and palaces, all are tied to one man's ability to rule without interruption. For Bruneians, that stability, whether loved or questioned, is a kind of comfort few nations enjoy. The story's end? Or just another chapter? So, what is the final word on Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah? Is he the palace-building king of unimaginable luxury? The faithful Muslim ruler defending traditions? The absolute monarch who built a welfare paradise? Or the controversial figure standing against Western criticism? The answer is, he is all of them. For more than half a century, he has lived not as one story, but as many. And perhaps that is why his legacy endures. Like the golden domes of the Jame Asr Mosque, his reign reflects light differently depending on where you stand. Some see brilliance, others see shadows, but all agree that the light is impossible to ignore. As the river flows past the glowing palace of Istana Nurul Iman, one thing is clear: Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah's reign has carved itself into history. Whether time remembers him as a hero, a guardian, or a ruler of contradictions,